Some of these photos and images in this motion picture may not be genuine in nature. Others are artistic drawings by skilled illustrators who are offering them as reproductions of their actual work done for highly classified governmental agencies, including the Department of Defense, the CIA, and the Secret Space Force.
No matter what you have witnessed, no matter what you have been told by the worldwide mainstream media,
this film you are now watching will either confirm your suspicions that you have been being lied to,
or change your mind about what you have been told to believe about our moon and Mars. The secret space program revealed. Blue Book, Blue Beam, and the real reason for the assassination of John F. Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States.
In a top-secret memo supposedly written on November 12, 1963, President JFK ordered the CIA director to organize the agency's intelligence files relating to UFOs, and to debrief him on all unknowns crafts by the following February. 10 days later, Kennedy was assassinated. This photograph, taken by NASA's lunar orbiter in February 1967, shows a mile-high spire rising from the lunar surface in the distance. It was named by Richard Hoagland the Shard, and he argues that there is no plausible geological explanation for it, so it must be artificially made. On July 20, 1969, worldwide media announced that an American spaceflight Apollo 11 had landed the first human on the moon. Astronaut Buzz Aldrin is shown standing on the moon facing a U.S. flag during the Apollo 11 mission in July 1969.
T-minus 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Booster ignition and liftoff of Discovery, hoisting harmony to the heavens and opening new gateways for international science. Discovery has cleared the tower.
Houston now controlling.
Roll program.
Roger, roll, Discovery.
In 1970, future Apollo missions were canceled and Apollo 17 became the last manned moon mission to date, or so we were told. The reason given to the public was it was too expensive.
Is it possible that the United States was not the first to land there after all? With just a bit of research, it immediately becomes apparent that the evidence shows that the German UFO program could easily have not only produced amazing crafts that could have reached the moon, but that they could have built a base there as well.
Additionally, there exists ample evidence to convince even the most ardent skeptic that the Nazis' top-secret UFO program also produced two other types of spacecraft: P-Heveral saucer and the huge interstellar transport, the Andromeda mothership that carried at minimum 4 of the smaller real crafts, and even at least one huge Hano. What is it about our moon and Mars that makes them so mysterious? And why is there such a stampede to not only get to Mars but to build bases there, even colonize it for future humanization? Let me show you some interesting photos and videos that have come to my attention over my 20-year career in the motion picture and filmmaking business. The following series of photos are from a variety of sources and are gathered in my personal UFO collection.
The Air Force in Mexico recorded UFOs, that the video was given to me, and I released that to the world. In that case, that happened on March the 5th, 2004, the soldiers were able to record something that they couldn't see with their own eyes. And that's amazing. That was the first time someone recorded something that they weren't able to see.
My purpose in doing this is that in order to do a film about our mysterious moon, our planet Mars, is to prove once and for all that UFOs are not only real, but have purposely been ridiculed and denied in such an ongoing manner as to affect the very lives of every human on this planet. And for over 50 years that evidence has been ignored, even when it includes first-hand testimony from qualified United States military whistleblowers. Thousands of witnesses worldwide have come forward. Pictures and videos have been presented to Congress and governmental agencies. Why were the general public not given access to photos and told of these cases when many of the witnesses reported them long ago? Volumes of evidence has proven that they most certainly have arrived here from a variety of different advanced stellar civilizations. Is it because the major governments of our world have agreed that together, they would cover up all the information and keep it from the general public? And even more important is the fact that whatever one wishes to call them, they are visitors from other worlds.
Half of the American people clearly state in poll after poll that UFOs are behind seeing in the sky, some of them, meaning there's an ET presence. Half. 80 to 90% are consistently saying the government's lying about this. The government's position is still, there's nothing to it. There's nothing at all, all right? So you have this huge disparity, right, between the citizens' view and the government's position. You've got contact going on, possibly with an untold number of individuals. The things are being seen all over the place, right? And so we're in this rather extraordinary position that is yet to be resolved. And then underneath all of that, a growing number of mostly retired, some active military and civilian agency, government agency people, less constrained because of their position and the fact that this is the 21st century, and it's not 1950 anymore, are starting to talk. They're starting to write books, they're starting to come public and talk, they're starting to talk to researchers in private, they're going in front of cameras, they're holding news conferences, and they're basically talking about what they saw, what they did, what they heard. And of course, and all of what they saw, did, and heard is supporting what the researchers had pretty much established as an extraterrestrial presence. The government knows about it, the government has embargoed it. Now, some of these individuals are high-level people, like astronauts and generals, admirals, captains and commanders, experienced military pilots, air traffic controllers. Some of them are intelligence officers. And then you've got NASA people and so forth. I mean, it's really quite extraordinary. We have a very awkward political situation that has to be resolved for a host of reasons, not the least of which, and this is why the work is very compelling, the work of, again, exopolitics, the politics of disclosure, and the political resolution is so compelling, is that it is ever clear, on a day-by-day basis, ever clear to most intelligent people that the human race has reached a critical time wherein its failings and limitations are positioned to do grave damage. It's always been bad behavior and plenty of outrageous activity on the part of human beings, but most of it in the past has been relatively confined and not able to do great damage. So it was awful and exciting to read about in history, but overall it was like, yeah, the Earth moved on. No longer. On about 3 or 4 different fronts, we finally reached our Peter principle, or the wall, or the end of the box canyon, all right? We've populated to 6 billion, and the planet just really can't support it. We're heading to 9 billion in approximately 35 years. 9 billion is just a number that is unfathomable, and it could have been worse. We have stressed the environment to the limit. We're melting the polar caps because we're adding heating on top of natural heating process. We've stuck holes in the ozone. We've fished out the oceans. We're creating massive pollution. We're reducing oxygen levels worldwide, sometimes as low as 5 and 6% in certain cities. We're creating emerging diseases. We have a massive cancer epidemic worldwide that is eventually going to reach 50% of all people will have cancer. And of course, the lack of the inability to feed and house and clothe the human race, particularly children, is producing horrific numbers. The most famous one, the one that's being heard more and more, is that depending upon the weather conditions in a given time, between 20 and 30,000 children, it means humans under the age of 16, simply die every day, every single day. 20 to 30,000 a day, all right, die, because either they don't have enough food or they have diseases that are related to their malnutrition or exposure to the elements. This is an unbelievable number. Now, if I were an extraterrestrial looking at the Earth objectively, much in the way that a society or a local neighborhood society would view objectively a family, imagine a family of 10 children where the husband and the wife, legally I might add, spend virtually all of the money in the family on guns, gun publications, joining membership in gun clubs, going on hunting trips and whatever, and do not spend any money on food, so that the children, maybe 4 or 5 of the 10 children, starve to death because they just don't feed them. They spend all the money on weapons, which is their hobby. What will we do? Well, we'd take the children, the remaining children, away from this couple. We would then try the couple in a court of law and send them to prison. Well, from an extraterrestrial point of view, that's exactly what would happen to the human race.
Today, many major governments still continue a cover-up in spite of the fact that hundreds of new UFO cases are documented worldwide nearly every day. And even more important is the fact that these extraterrestrials are visitors from other worlds and are here on our planet. Have you ever wondered about what is really going on up there on the Moon and Mars? And could there be any truth to all the reports that many countries, including the United States, already have operational bases up there? The next series of photos are very interesting, as some come from secret-sourced individuals who have or have had access to the newest generation telescopes. Telescopes like the James Webb Space Telescope, the Lucifer Telescope, and secret satellite telescopes, which will go unnamed. Their photos, which I am revealing here next, are actual images of current Nazi, old German, and American bases on our moon. Even more surprising is that early American bases on our moon were also established there way back in the 1950s. Those amazing achievements made by the United States was due to the capture and a special release of a team of top Nazi SS scientists. Between 1945 and 1959, Operation Paperclip, a top-secret United States intelligence program, transferred 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians from Nazi Germany to the United States. On June 20, 1945, United States Secretary of State Edward Stettinius Jr. approved the transfer of Wernher von Braun and his specialists to the United States as one of his last acts in office. Those Nazi SS scientists were transferred at the end of the war, headed up the U.S. space program, and was immediately put under the direction of Wernher von Braun. First rank, from left to right, General Dr. Walter Dornberger, partially hidden General Friedrich Olbricht, with Knight's Cross, Major Heinz Brandt, and Wernher von Braun in civilian dress, at Peenemünde, province of Pomerania, in March 1941. Wernher von Braun became NASA's first director on July 1, 1960, and held that position until January 27, 1970. For over 50 years, FOP secret missions by the United States' Secret Space Force have been adding modules and additional bases on both the Moon and Mars. These modules and bases have been added without congressional or presidential oversight on a regular pre-planned basis. Here are a few select photographs, and as this film progresses, we will reveal even more astounding information. Watch closely and you will see for yourself photos and images of early German and American UFOs and humans. Surprisingly, many were taken long ago on our Moon and Mars. This is a NASA print showing a humanoid walking on the moon. We see his shadow behind him. He is walking without a spacesuit. And yes, there is an atmosphere up there equivalent to about 18,000 to 20,000 feet. Another NASA print showing a crashed cigar-shaped mothership laying upside down next to a crater on the moon. Two water tanks in the lower center of the picture. This print came directly from NASA. This is NASA's own photo of green vegetation on our moon. People should go and get their own copy of this one. That series of images was taken by high-resolution telescopes currently in operation and in actual fact have been operational for years. Here is a rendering showing 2 pyramids on our moon. There are at least 13 pyramids on our moon. The general population have not been given access or information about these bases. Simply put, all of these advances and the data from them were paid for by tax dollars. Instead, those images and the information about these discoveries have been kept hidden through a purposeful system of false and complex reporting by the government of the United States and its allied countries. Next will come video testimony from UFO researchers who will add credibility to the case that extraterrestrial beings, or ETs, have been seen and even captured here on Earth. That way you can evaluate the information that is disclosed here and decide for yourself the actual reality of what has been covered up for over 60 years. Lieutenant Colonel Wendell Stevens, retired, was one of the world's highest regarded UFO researchers. Wendell spent his life involved in ufology. While in the military, Wendell was a senior officer involved with the United States Special Programs including Project Blue Book, Project Sign, and Project Grudge. During his life, Wendell authored over 20 books on the subjects of the alien presence and collected over 3,000 UFO photos. What follows is his personal account of his extraterrestrial experiences, including the history of military programs and cases involving the recovery of alien craft.
Okay, I'm Wendell Stevens, Lieutenant Colonel, United States Air Force, retired. I have been investigating this phenomena for over 50 years. It actually began in the Air Force when I was reassigned to Alaska. I was working in the Foreign Technology Division of the Air Technical Intelligence Center at Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio. I was a test pilot in the Flight Test Division there. All pilots had to have an additional, actually a primary duty. Flying was your additional duty. So my primary duty was in the Air Technical Intelligence Center screening the captured war documents from the former enemies, and they were coming in by the ship road to the ports and the truckload to Air Materiel Command. I had save lists from our contractors, government contractors. I had save lists from the government. We had our own save lists, and I had my own particular save list, and what we didn't save was sent to the shredder. It was shredded and burned, and some interesting things came back. One thing, for example, that went across my desk that I later was very sorry about was a map from Germany. It was a battle map, and it was in color, and it showed the array of forces near the end of the war, near the collapse of Germany, and it showed what the forces coming from the east and from the west, and what looked like an escape corridor to the south if anybody wanted to get out. That was all white. Now on that map were 9 little Saturn-shaped symbols stamped on with a rubber stamp. And I didn't know what they were, and I didn't know what they meant at the time, and I sent the map to the shredder and it was burned. And later I found that those were the Kugelblitz development facilities run by the Germans, where they developed their own disk programs. And then I was sorry that I had destroyed it. But later I found a copy of a similar map in a book published in Canada on what they called the Samizdat Press by Mattern and Friedrich, that showed a similar map, or maybe even the same map, that showed those 9 positions with the little Saturn-shaped symbols, and they were explained as representing the 9 research facilities developed by the Germans for that program. That program, incidentally, was kept under the tightest control by the SS. It developed under the SS, and they decided to keep it under their control in a special staff office called the Entwicklungsstelle SSE4. And they controlled all of the development information on the various DISC programs. They had several. By the time the war ended, they had 9. Now, when the Germans were reversed in Russia and they saw they weren't going to win the war anymore, they began dismantling those factories and evacuating them. The ones that they couldn't successfully dismantle, they just blew up and destroyed them. We believe that the Russians captured one partly intact, enough to get some information out of it. We were unable to capture an intact facility, but we did capture something like 9 of their discs in various stages of development and shipped them back to White Sands Missile Test.
The Government Public Information Office was not given the sensitive information from the German secret DISC program. Simply put, all of these advances and the data about their flying saucer program was kept from them, even though it was paid for by tax dollars.
On the ground floor is a public information office, and they were only given information that was purged and sent down to them from upstairs. So what they got had a lot of blacked out, censorship blacked out on their reports, and they had to conclude for the public what that caused the situation from what was already deleted, which they didn't know. So the public accepted the idea that this was the agency to contact on new reports, and they began to get letter reports from the public itself, which were different from the reports that were coming down from upstairs. And they found that there seemed to be things really happening that were not, that upstairs didn't seem to know about. So they started following up on some of these letters and began to go out and look at a few of the cases, and decided that there was more to this than meets the eye, and more than they were getting from upstairs. So they thought they were helping by the upstairs by collecting information, and they tried to investigate more and more and send it upstairs. This defeated the purpose, because now instead of explaining it all to the public, they're raising the interest level. So they closed Project Sign, boxed all the records, and reassigned everybody. Then the cases continued, and reports kept coming in. The public now wants to know, well, who's going to handle it now? Where's the office we report these things to? So they had to reopen the office someplace, and the Air Force didn't want to take it. They did everything they could do to avoid it. They tried to get the government to give it to NASA. They tried to get them to give it to the Navy. They tried to get them to give it to the Army. They tried to avoid it every way they could, and finally the Chief of Staff of the Air Force says, no, you're going to take it. So they reopened the boxes and named it Project Grudge, appropriately named. This time they assigned a first lieutenant and a second lieutenant, 3 sergeants, and 2 secretaries. And someplace midway in Project Grudge, they added a captain, replaced the first lieutenant with a captain, Captain Ruppelt. The same thing happened with Project Sign, and Ruppelt began investigating cases on his own, a kind of a maverick. He didn't have authorization to do it, but he was getting information that was meaningful, and he would follow up on it. And he finally he collected his own information. He wrote a book, and he sold the book to a Book of the Month publishing house, and they published it. And when the Air Force found out about it, they ordered the publishing house to recall all the books and have the last chapter rewritten. Ruppelt had concluded that there was certainly something going on here with the last words, only time will tell. The government made a rewrite the whole last chapter, saying that there was really nothing to this, and that it was not worth spending a lot of money on investigating. And that was republished and sent out in the place of the first edition. So you can tell if you have an original edition, if it has if the last 3 words in the book say only time will tell, that's the original edition. Government failed to catch them all. There's a few out, but not many. The rest of them will have a different ending to the book. That was written by Captain Ruppelt. Now, okay, now Ruppelt, because he did that and because the staff now is looking for cases and collecting information, they closed Project Grudge. And the Air Force once more tried to get rid of it. Or again, they were ordered to take it on. So this time they looked for an officer, a climber, that will obey all the instructions. He tries to please his commander the best way he can all the time, anxious to be promoted. They found that in the form of Major Hector Quintanilla. When the commander of Air Materiel Command interviewed him and told him that he was going to be given all the material the Air Force had on the subject, and he was going to have to answer to the public, report to the public on this. He thought and wanted to believe and did believe that he had everything in his office. He still only had a ceiling classification of confidential. He only had purged reports, but he didn't care. He's trying to please his superiors by saying, and he really believed, I think, that he was being given everything. And that rocked along that way until the government hired the Condon Committee. They were looking for somebody to take the wind out of the sails of the UFO phenomena, and they hired the Condon Committee to run an official investigation and find out if it was really necessary for the government to get into this investigation. Well, of course, they're in it all the time at the upper staff level, but they're trying to keep the public from knowing about that. So they found the one they were looking for in the form of the University of Colorado, which owed the government a few things, and they paid them $500,000 to run a proper investigation with a specific finding. Now, what kind of an investigation is that? They had to find what they found. That was what they were paid for. So they hired people that they thought would follow toe the line, would follow the directions of the director of the project, who was, gosh, I forget, Condon, Ulysses Condon from the Colorado University. And he had scientists that didn't agree with this project, and they felt independent, and one of them wrote a book, UFOs Yes. Two more quit the project. When it came to writing the final report, they wrote the final report they thought it ought to get, and when it got to Condon, he said, no, we can't do that. And he rewrote the report. And that report that came out of that was Condon's report himself, and he cut out all the stuff that would support anything, and ended with the conclusion that there was not enough indication that this was a serious matter for the Air Force to be expending any more money in conducting research and investigating the cases. But an upper staff continued to do that anyway, and it was more people and more heavily funded than ever before. But that's what the projects were. So they closed Project Blue Book, sent all the files to the Air University at Montgomery, Alabama. That's where they are today. They're closed files. There is no public information office at this time to answer the question. If you look any place, they say the project was closed and the files are at Montgomery, Alabama. Go look at them.
These UFOs and these alien visitors are real. They are visiting our planet Earth and being seen not only by our astronauts, but by thousands of people here on Earth. And, in fact, they have been visiting our beautiful planet for many thousands of years. Now looking back over 60 years, we will continue with Lieutenant Colonel Wendell Stevens' exclusive on-camera interview. Next, Wendell shares his information on where the different alien races originated.
People often ask me after a presentation, they say, well, where are they? And where do they come from and what are they doing here? And the answer is not a simple answer. It is not a simple they, and it's not a simple activity. And I have investigated over 100 cases in great detail where the aliens came back over and over to the same contactee and watched the changes in his life and the developments as they progressed and been able to measure and verify them. And in that 100 and some cases, I'll say, let's round it to 100, I have only found 2 cases that might be coming from the same place doing the same thing, and that was Reticulum. The Betty and Barney Hill had an indication that after Marjorie Fisher's examination of the evidence that the astronomical configuration that she saw on the screen might have included Reticulum, Zeta 1 and Zeta 2 of Reticulum. The aliens didn't tell her where they came from, because they said if you don't know where your sun is, what good will it do us to show you where we come from? So Marjorie Fish concluded that those came from Reticulum, and they may have, because their appearance was very much like the ones that were contacting William Herman in North Charleston, South Carolina. Those little beings that are typically called grays today, and pretty much match the ones that were described by Barney Hill, told him that they came, specifically, that they came from a planet they call, from a planet that orbits one of twin suns that they call Reticulum. And when we look at the constellation Reticulum, which means net, the net, we see two suns, big, bright suns, together. And they told Herman, who is not an astronomer at all, that the two suns are twin suns that run parallel in sidereal space, which meant nothing to Bill Herman. So when I reported that to the astronomers at Kate Peaks, I laughed and says, there's no such thing as twin suns. In astronomy, there's no, every time there's two stars close together, they're binary. They become binary. He says that just the astrophysics makes them binary. So I said, well, watch these two and tell me if you can find out whether they're really twin suns running parallel in sidereal space, or if they're really binary. If they're binary, they must have a long period. So that was 15 years ago, and just recently one of the astronomers called me and said, you know, those two suns in Reticulum do seem to be parallel suns, running parallel in sidereal space. They do not appear to be binaries, and they're changing the catalog to show this. So those Reticulans told Bill Herman that they came from one of them, and that in their same sun system there was another planet that had evolved beings traveling in space. We've never met them. So that was a kind of a confirmation, but these were different. They're not humans like the Pleiadians. These are the other species. Now, there's an interesting study that was done in 1979. Both MUFON in the United States and CUFON, an equivalent in Canada, took all the known cases and plotted them and looked for comparisons. And they ran tables and graphs and charts, and they found, as a result of the study, it lasted months, that working from known data, they found that about 1/3 of the visitors to this planet were humans just like us. Different morphology, different appearances and so forth. Bigger ears, smaller ears, changing them out, bigger eyes, less hair, no hair at all on the body, but human creatures, placental human creatures like us, animals. Second category, a second third. The first third was humans. The second third was what we commonly call grays today, and the Reticulans would fit in that category. There are a lot of grays. There's only one gray species that comes from Reticulum, and that's often confused. But the second category being those gray types, they are non-placental creatures. You saw one on the autopsy table in the Santilli film. They don't have any gastrointestinal system. They don't have any sex organs. They are a different class of being altogether. We don't even know for sure whether they're animal or not. And they didn't have any sex organs, distinguishable sex organs, so we don't know what sex they are. And then the third class is a catch-all category. Third is a catch-all category that includes everything else, the tentacled species, the fuzzy blobs, hairy balls, and all that sort of thing. There's a lot of different varieties, but there's a great. Now this pretty much confirms the statements that the other statement I made earlier, that the nature of contact with this planet is infinitely varied. None of the species are the same. None of the humans are exactly alike. None of the grays are exactly alike, and all of the exotic different species are all different from each other. So that would also tend to confirm the fact that they all come from different planets, from different sources, and they have different technologies and doing different things. Yet they're intelligent enough to produce vehicles and be traveling in space. And that ought to be interesting. The possibilities are so vast. What their objectives are, I would have to believe from what I see that each one has his own game, that there is no common approach to the Earth species, that we're just another species that is being examined by different species because we are different from them in some degree. The humans are examining us because we're different humans. The other species because we're different creatures. And I don't see any peculiar pattern of contact here myself, because it appears that we're accidentally discovered by, there doesn't seem to be any program of contact to this planet. except by a given species from a given planet at a given time. And there doesn't seem to be any organized relationship involving this planet that would indicate a major project of some kind by somebody. So I've got to believe that our planet, our sun even, is off in the boonies. It's not a part of a regular traffic system. We don't have regular visitors. The ones that find us are happenstance, and they appear here occasionally when they discover what appears to be intelligent life on this planet. And I find evidence in the way that develops that many of the alien visitors only encounter other alien visitors here. That space is so vast and the cosmos is so vast that they just don't encounter each other until they're both in the same place at the same time doing something related. So the Reticulans met the Pleiadians here, and they didn't know about them before that because there was no traffic with them.
For decades, the United States has an ongoing program with at least one alien race.
I believe that there is an ongoing program with at least one race, and possibly more. And I got to tell you about a friend of mine, I won't give you his name, who was an engineer at Area 51. And if I give you any more about that, he'd be identifiable. But his job was an important job, and he spent a whole career there, retired from his job there. In about the 1960s, apparently our government made contact with an alien extraterrestrial visitor where they negotiated an arrangement to provide a surface facility for the aliens to operate from in exchange for some technology. And that's scuttlebutt all over the area, but there is some substance in fact. So when the agreement was reached, the Alien Society laid some requirements on our government. They said we would have to provide a suitable habitat for the beings that they would send here from their society. And they gave us some very specific instructions for it. The laboratory facility had to have 2 nozzles in the shower, one for water and one for enzymes. And they would bring enzymes from their home planet to be put in a tank to be dispensed through the second nozzle. The enzymes were lathed over the body first and rubbed in. They stand there for a time, and then they rinse off with water, and the water and the enzymes are collected at the bottom, and the enzymes are filtered out, put back in the tank, and the water is flushed away. That was one of the requirements. Another was a food requirement. They don't eat alimentation such as ours. They brought alimentation from their home planet that we had to learn to culture here in Area 51 to provide a food source for their diet. Our government was charged with the responsibility to produce the food from their products continually for alimentation for the guest visitors. Now those guest visitors arrived in an operational vehicle that they still keep operation of. They can go and come. They fly in and out of their habitat facility at will. They're not restrained in any way. But my engineer friend was one of the several engineers that were assigned to work with the extraterrestrials to try to bridge the gap between their technology and ours. And in 20 years of research trying to do so, they never succeeded in closing the gap. We were never able to convert that technology to ours. And the reason given by the aliens themselves is because in order to operate their equipment, they have to impart a certain mental input. And we have never learned to impart the input that's necessary to make the machines work. So their equipment responds to mind, to thought, and we have never learned to impart the proper thought to make any of it work. There is no way that we can bridge the gap with a wire from this point to that point, from theirs to ours, and make it work. There's no such wire. And that's interesting because those aliens I think one is very ill now and about to die, but they've been there since the 60s. That's for 35 years. And we've been trying to solve the problem all that time and haven't succeeded. That's one entity that I know about. There were 2 of them involved, 2 aliens involved, 1 craft. There may be others that I don't know about. That one I am quite sure is legitimate and real. The last I heard is one of those alien beings. We don't know whether they're males or females either because they don't have any sex organs. They have not reproduced out there. They do go and come as they please, and sometimes they're seen by others outside or even in Area 51. They're not detained, but it's an interesting experiment because there may be other programs going on that are not as beneficent.
The Kingman, Arizona recovery incident.
Okay, my friend from Area 51 told me an interesting story about an event that happened out there. We had another crash come down about 8 miles north by northwest of Kingman, Arizona, at the old Kingman Air Base, northwest of Kingman Air Base. And that one was successfully recovered by teams from Area 51 using Area 51 equipment. There were 4 living aliens in that. All 4 of them were evacuated to Los Alamos, where they had already prepared a habitat for such events. And when the Area 51 team got the ship back to Area 51, it was beeping the whole time it was on the ground. When they got back to Area 51, it was still beeping. They couldn't figure out how to stop the beeping. And after a week of the irritating beeping that they just couldn't seem to turn off, somebody says, well, why don't we get the occupants to come back and turn it off? So they drove the occupants back from Los Alamos in a carryall to Area 51, indicated by sign language what they wanted them to do. They acknowledged and they said they'd have to go aboard. They didn't want to let them go aboard. They thought they'd take the ship off and fly away. But they finally consented. That's the only way they're going to stop it. They sent a guard in with them, and the guard came out vomiting before in just a few seconds. And the crew is in there together alone. Craft didn't start up and fly away, probably couldn't anyway. They turned the sound off and came back to the door. The carryall backed up and they loaded them, took them back to Los Alamos.
Los Alamos is involved.
Now, Los Alamos is involved, and that has been involved all along. So I'll tell you another story. My friend, the engineer, after 20 years of trying to solve the problem of bridging the gap between the technologies, is invited in 1968. Well, it wasn't 20 years by then. He was invited to Los Alamos for a project review conference. And they had about 18 scientists that all had been working on the project, various stages of the project, gathered around a big oval table in the Los Alamos headquarters with Edward Teller, the head of the Atomic Energy Commission, sitting at the head of the table. One of the aliens on the opposite side of the table from my engineering friend put in a white shirt and slacks so he would look less alien, but he still had his alien bigger head, bigger eyes, black eyes. And he was sitting in the conference, and the only people that he could understand everybody else because he was telepathic. And the only way he could communicate, though, was with the signs that he had developed with my engineer friend to answer the question. But here's a man, an alien from another planet, sitting in a conference in 1968 in Los Alamos headquarters on the progress of learning how to bridge the gap between the alien technology and ours.
Lieutenant Colonel Wendell Stevens passed away at the age of 87. Wendell's legacy is not only his 22 books but his in-depth knowledge and friendship of so many to his fellow researchers. We are fortunate to have an amazing found footage interview of Lieutenant Colonel Wendell C. Stevens from a network television show recorded in Tucson, Arizona in 2003. We will provide it as part of this film's conclusion later in this program.
I was fortunate I had a chance to talk to Peter Jennings for his ABC special, and the first question he asked me was, what caused you to be interested in this subject? When I was 16 years old, I was walking down the street in Arlington, Virginia, and saw 7 red light type UFOs over Washington that made headlines around the world. And since then, I've seen 8 alien vehicles on 8 occasions. It was just that 3 seconds, alien vehicles on 8 occasions, that got on the ABC special. But that started me to become a truth seeker on 26 July 1952. I've read everything I could find about UFOs and the alien presence since then. At 17, I went to Duke, read everything in their library on the subject. American Rocket Society had the most interesting stuff. Went to the Air Force 26 years as a fighter pilot, staff scientist, teacher, program manager, got a master's in nuclear engineering, retired at age 47, So the day after I retired officially, I became a field investigator and state section director for MUFON for 5 counties in western Florida. The next year became state director for Florida. In '89, I was elected to be the Eastern Regional Director of MUFON, overseeing the investigative activities in 18 eastern states. In '93, I became a director of the International UFO Congress. I want to have something I want to show you. You know, this pin, this rather strange pin that I wear, is probably describes one of the most important things going on this planet right now. I think these little guys are Zeta Reticulans that many of the abductees, UFO abductees, see in their secret nightlife, if you want to call it that. And I'm absolutely convinced from everything I've seen over the past 52 years that there's a long-term program to upgrade our biological computer. Anybody that knows anything about computers knows you have to upgrade your computer every now and then. I think we're getting a bigger hard drive, a faster chip, and a new USB port for telepathy. And let me show you what I think you get when you combine the genes of these two species. I think this is, although not named by Time magazine, but this is Homo Alterios Spacialis, higher human from space. And these are our offspring, our children that have to be hidden from us until the consciousness of our neighbors changes and was willing to accept them. This picture was shown to millions and millions of people on ABC. They didn't say anything about it, but they put this picture into the consciousness of Americans at least, and eventually the world, I think. One more time. You know you have to be somebody special to get your face on the cover of Time magazine. This is a promo issue, 23 June 1997 for the Roswell 50th anniversary, Roswell crash 50th anniversary. Certainly there is a cover-up, and all UFO researchers recognize that Project Blue Book, the most public cover-up, was just the government's public relations agency. They did announce to the world they wanted to know about our UFO sightings and stuff, but the cases that were really worthwhile and could not be explained away by some natural or man-made object were not investigated by Blue Book. They were passed on to the real investigators. And I'm convinced that the Office of Naval Intelligence was the office of primary responsibility for ground, or you might say ground activities associated with the alien presence. And the reason is because their bases were in Navy territory, not in Air Force territory. Although we'd see them more in the air, these things could come and go from the air down through the water, no problem. You read books like Wendell Stevens' book, Contact from Undersea. It's a very interesting story. It was 1979 when Filiberto Cardenas was pulled up a blue beam in broad daylight with 3 of his friends, taken to a little island. This wall opens up, he gets into a little flying saucer, and he goes out over the water very fast down through the water. The water didn't touch the vehicle. Ended up in a garage down there where there were a bunch of flying saucers and stuff. And the head alien down there told him there were 700 working out of that base, and there are lots of other bases underground and undersea. Well, that first time, I just saw red lights that were about as bright as Venus would be at its brightest, maybe a minus 4.5 magnitude. But they were wandering around in random motion, and obviously not aircraft or celestial objects. And my thought was, gee, is this what I read about last Sunday morning in the newspaper? Because the Washington Star had flying saucers in the headlines. And so nothing more was happening. So I, after about 10 minutes of watching them, so I went on to bed. It was, pushing midnight by then. I got up early the next morning to get the newspaper, and sure enough, again, second Sunday morning in a row, the word flying saucers was in the headlines. The aliens put on a demonstration to the extent that the media could not ignore it and the government couldn't cover it up. Let me get back to that earlier question. Can you imagine any president standing before the public and saying, yes, I am aware that we have this joint program with some aliens to upgrade our biological computers, to build better bodies to house our souls in future incarnations. And we are picking up your daughters and your wives, and we're taking their eggs, we're splicing in the right genes. Some are a subspecies that look more like us, and their human mothers are allowed to raise them, but those that don't look enough like us to fit in with our society are taken at 3 to 3.5 months. They're about that long. We put them in artificial wombs. Then we pick up the mothers again, and we take them in and allow them to hold them within their aura to nurture them. We pick up the grandmothers sometimes for the same purpose. He says, they can't talk about things like that. If any president made that kind of statement, then you know, because they pick them up and they have to put the altered egg in there, and then they pick them up again. He wouldn't be able to do the job we hired him to do. The media would hound him to death. You know, it'd be ridiculous. So I understand the reasons for the secrecy. I spent 26 years in the Air Force, and I know if the government has a secret they really want to keep, they don't admit they have a secret.
Now is the time that the people of Earth deserve to be told what is really going on, not only about our moon but on Mars, but about our secret Space Force and their real capabilities. What are the future plans that will involve all of humanity? We encourage you to call your congressional representatives, tell them to look at this video and to demand the truth that has been hidden for so many years. Tell them to stop spending taxpayer dollars and broadcasting lies about what is really going on. Let them know that the moon is no longer mysterious and that we know that our moon is a way station for further expansion. Let the world know that we know that Mars is already being populated, that there are already teams there in jump gates, spaceports, and fully staffed battles groups, that wars have been fought for ownership and for planetary control. But first we need to address what explains what I have been showing and telling you here in this film, and those are called Special Access Programs and referred to as SAPs. Special Access Programs, or SAPs, protect national security by employing enhanced security measures to strictly enforce need-to-know operations or black budget undertakings. These types of hidden programs are operated without the knowledge of not only Congress and the public but in many cases even the President and his entire staff. Is it possible that what has been really happening on our moon and Mars has actually been a special access program? Please continue to watch and listen to the testimony and images that follow and then decide for yourself.
What is the current reality if you only knew the truth? As Jack Nicholson would say, you can't handle the truth. I don't even know where to start. All I can tell you is that, as weird as this might sound, and I come from inside the media, I come from having had national radio shows on 2 different networks with, hundreds of affiliates, with starting out knowing astronauts and knowing people in the military industrial complex, having relatives who were colonels in the Marine Corps and admirals in the Navy, and there is so little of your reality that is really based on truth that it's just stunning. I mean, if I told you that the very nature of the moon and Mars and most of the planets in the solar system is being kept from you for specific reasons to make you think that you're completely alone and that these planets can't be colonized. To ask that kind of question, the problem with anything in this field is that ultimately it's like running through a luminous field of weeds. Eventually you get to a black wall and are faced with virtually nothing but Zen cones and riddles as to what's on the other side of that wall. It's not like these people in the government, call somebody like me up on the phone and tell them, well, this is our evil scheme today. there's, and it's also, it's kind of a weird thing too, is because it's almost, the more you know about this field, it becomes almost paralyzing, because the more you know, the less you know. The more you know, and the more open-minded you are about this, the more you realize that that every answer you find just leads to a 1,000 more questions. You can go back to whether or not it was German technology, and originally in the 1930s, that with the von Schauberger implosion engines and electromagnetics and whatever else, did the Germans escape to the South Pole or somewhere in South America, and are these beautiful blonde Nordic extraterrestrials really just Germans in disguise? When you go to Area 51, and I've seen with my own eyes flying disc technology videotape this thing, doing right angle turns and skipping across the sky and appearing and disappearing. Once again, extraterrestrial, UFOs, but who's flying them? Is it our military learning how to fly them, or are they actual extraterrestrials that are captured there? When you see shuttles that are 1,600 feet long, when you interview scientists who claim that we've had vehicles capable of extrasolar travel since the early 1970s, when you think that that there are cults, if you will, scientific cults that have existed for hundreds of years, and that maybe we've never lost a single advance in technology since Da Vinci. Maybe when he invented the airplane and the helicopter and the tank and the submarine or whatever else back in the 16th century, that there are groups of people maybe who've been developing that technology all along. When you think about human development, the way the Islamic world was developing in the 10th, 11th, and 12th centuries. In the 10th century in Turkey, they had gaslit streets and hot and cold running water, while we Europeans were rolling in the mud looking for grubs. And had the Crusades not occurred, the Arabs probably would have put a man on the moon sometime in the 1800s. So when you look at somebody like Jules Verne or H.G. Wells or George Orwell, all of whom were Fabian socialists, and the Fabian socialists being inside this core advance in technology, that what they were looking at as science fiction was in fact a reality that was being revealed to them by these secret societies that said, this is what we could do. If you look at H.G. Wells' First Men on the Moon, and you look at the actual accuracies of First Men on the Moon as opposed to what they did with Apollo, it's really pretty stunning. There is a body of evidence that shows that there are bases on the moon, all over the place, backside of the moon, front side of the moon, that the moon is constantly being mined, that there are objects that travel back and forth across the moon. But once again, is it us or is it them? There have been records from the London Royal Observatory back through the 1700s of lights on the moon and bridges on the moon and all kinds of crazy things on the moon. In 1955, there was a bridge over a chasm that was something like 100 miles long that just appeared overnight after a series of red and green lights were seen over that particular area. Again, was it us? Did the National Security Agency really land on the moon in 1953? Is it the Germans with their technology? Are they the Fourth Reich? Are they Hitler's last battalion that will tip the scales when the final battle of East meets West occurs, as Hitler had said? I don't know. I mean, again, what's being covered up, and there's ships out there, and who's flying them, and is it us or them? Aldous Huxley said something very interesting when he said that we found a footprint upon the face of the unknown, and found to our dismay that it is in fact ours. My father was in aerospace, and was a customer communications vice president of TRW, worked for Martin Marietta, worked for TRW, hence NASA. They built the lunar modules and satellites and rockets and whatever else. I grew up around astronauts, Gus Grissom, Gordon Cooper, Don Isley, Buzz Aldrin, Neil Armstrong. I have two godfathers that have walked on the moon, David Scott, Harrison Jack Schmidt. So I mean, I knew the guys that were there. I knew the guys that had access, and were the dudes going up in space. Meanwhile, I got interested in this because they always felt that, especially Gus Grissom, who was probably the person I was closest to, felt that they were spam in a can, that they were that the astronauts were just a public relations campaign for a secret military program that was spending much more. The military space program was getting, was a gleaming jewel compared to the junk that NASA was getting at the time, and they always felt that there was some kind of cover-up. I got into this because Jim Levitt, for example, is McDivitt James McDivitt, came and showed UFO photos on the wall of our house. And these guys used to take these little Bell and Howell wind-up 8mm cameras in their suits and take pictures of these things that used to follow the craft out the windows, and they couldn't show them to anybody else, so they'd come over and we'd set up a big sheet, you know how it was in the 60s, and people would watch these UFO photos. You know, we'd sit there and watch them on the wall. Years later, I interviewed Gordon Cooper, and I was the first one to get him to admit that, you know, that he'd seen extraterrestrial craft in space, that he saw UFOs at Area 51. Gordon was very active in it because he tried to get the United Nations to come up with extraterrestrial contact protocols, and you know, Gordon and I were actually very close.
Have we, the general public here on planet Earth, been living in a web of lies and illusions? So secret was this Nazi SS program that even Adolf Hitler was not fully aware of their capabilities. Or that these flying saucer weapons and their testing had included secret flights to our moon and beyond. Now is the time for full and for complete disclosure. Now is the time to tell the broad public of the world the true story of what actually happened so very long ago. And now is the time to tell the real story of why NASA and our heroic astronauts have been forced to lie about what they have seen and experienced. To tell the world why such an elaborate hoax was necessary. Why billions of taxpayer dollars have been spent so that a few elite individuals were given our planet's moon and Mars to do with as they chose. Let's take a look at even more testimony that will lift the curtain and reveal even more about the UFO and alien reality here on planet Earth.
My name is Agi Nost, and I was born on a farm back in Norway. And it was right after the Second World War in 1946. There were two guys that came out to the farm in the harvest season. And that happened several years in a row. They came to help out in the harvest. And one of them, he told me that he had been a prisoner in a German concentration camp. And while he was there, he had seen round airplanes that had no wings on it and no engines. And I believe he said that they had been at the Bergen-Belsen camp. This was in northern Germany, and there were a lot of secret installations in that part of the country. It didn't make a lot of sense at the time because I was just a little kid. But later, when I started researching what happened during the war, and I talked to people that had information that normally was not spoken of or written about, then it started to make sense, because I found in Norwegian newspapers there were articles about the rumors that the Germans had developed around airplanes. And I read that. Then it started making sense. I am quite sure there was something to that, what these two guys told me. Later on, at the age of 25, I left Norway and came to the United States to become a professional pilot. I did that, and I got all my certificates and ratings, commercial pilot license, instrument, all the way up to instrument multi-engine instructor. With a partner, we had a flight school, an international air taxi, and an air carrier. And I flew a lot. And when you fly as much as I did, you see stuff that is in the sky. You can't explain it, and it really shouldn't be there, but it is. And of course, I'm talking about UFOs. I don't care what the government says or what they name it. To me, they will be UFOs, because that's what they are: unidentified flying objects. I flew for 23 years, and then I quit flying, and I started going deeper into the study of the real power of the mind. I started reading about and studying. And what I find is that once you start dipping your toe into quantum mechanics, just about everything spiritual can be explained through quantum mechanics because there is options for it. I also studied time travel. And I've had some very strange experiences with the device that I have. And BBC television came out to the United States, and they did a TV documentary on time travel. And that was with myself and Michio Kaku and Green, and I think there was another theoretical physicist on the panel. This got very interesting, because what we're finding is that time travel is very possible, because there are pictures and there are artifacts that proves it. I also study the moon and Mars, and I'm also finding on that we're not being told the truth. There's a lot of secrets the governments are holding about those two places, and we found some of them, and you're going to see that in this documentary. I also had several radio shows. I hosted and produced 2 TV shows for 6 years in Tucson, and we had some phenomenal guests. And now I am a podcaster, and I'm giving interviews for some of the books that I have written and what I teach and what I talk about. And I wrote those books for the people that want to improve their life. I wrote them in such a way that it teaches you how to expand your mind and do things that you normally would think would be impossible. So, I have found that UFOs are real because I've seen them. And many of you out there listening, you have seen them. I want to introduce you to a man, a good friend, but he is no longer with us. His name was Wendell, Colonel Wendell Stevens. Colonel Stevens was probably the most knowledgeable person in the world when it came to the round airplane program and the exotic technologies that the German war machine created. Some of it sounds like science fiction. But I was at his house, and he showed me pictures, and he showed me some very old documents written in German. And I read them, and I am totally convinced those documents, they were real. And yes, in the early 1940s, the Germans were the first ones to send something up into space. They used a stretched V2 rocket with a camera in the nose of it, and they actually took a picture of Earth from space. And they were the first. And yes, the Germans also built round airplanes based on electrogravitics. They built the craft around the drive system. And they called the drive system Die Glocke, which it looked like a bell. And it created a gravity nullification effect around the aircraft with a plasma bubble. Now, in about 1944, they also flew a Hano 2 to the moon. They flew around it and mapped it. And they found buildings there, they found artifacts, and they also found a swastika. That was a huge, very long building, about a mile wide, built of stone, and they fell in love with it. And then when they came back, the decision was made that they were going to start going back to the moon and rebuild that building. And they did. And that is where they have a base today. And I found a long lost TV interview that I did with Colonel Stevens here in Tucson in about 2003. And it's interesting. He talks about the German flying disc program and the exotic technologies, so you need to hear this.
Well, hello. And you're watching The Hidden Truth, the TV talk show for the thinking American. My name is Augie, and I'm the host. I have with me today a legend in his own time when it comes to paranormal and UFO research. He's a world traveler. He's an author. He's a very sought-after lecturer. And he is a native of Tucson, Arizona. And he has some information that is phenomenal. He's probably the one on the American continent that has researched the German flying discs more than anybody I know. And you're going to see some pictures tonight about the German flying saucers, the machines that would have turned the war against the Allied forces. If we were given just a few more months, we would have lost the war. You're going to see some astounding photos and drawings, schematics that I don't know if they're hardly ever shown anywhere before, of this very controversial issue that Hitler and his cronies created right before the end of the war. And I want to introduce to you Wendell Stevens.
How do you, sir?
Well, here we are, finally. It took a while to get here. You're a busy man.
Yeah, move around a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, what do we want to talk about tonight?
Well, I don't know. I started out on the flying saucers, and boy, I tell you, that is an excellent place to continue. You were running through some slides here, and I've seen some of these before, but I saw you had some new ones that I've never seen before.
Well, you know, the German disc research took two separate tracks. One phase was moving through the German aerotechnical industry, which was all the aircraft manufacturers building the new aircraft and new weapons for the German Reich, and that was all in super secrecy also. But we had the orthodox aircraft builders, BMW and Zeppelin and Laredo and all of the others or not all of them, but many of the others were working on disc projects. The disc research project was the V7 weapons research program of the German Reich. We knew that the V1 was the buzz bombs, the V2 was the rocket, the intercontinental rockets. We heard of V3 and V4, and I don't know really what they were, but they were other exotic weapons. And we never heard of the V7 weapons research program. The V7 weapons research program was all discs. And one phase, as I say, was working through the German aerotechnical industry in an ordinary way, and the other one the research was carried out in greater secrecy by the SS, the Nazi SS themselves. And it was
the Black Sun
kept completely under the control of the Nazi SS, and Entwicklung SSE4 is the staff office that managed the V7 weapons research program for the SS. And the SS versions used exotic engines and exotic technical phenomena. They used free energy devices to power the craft. And they had anti-gravity control. Now, those were all managed under the SS program. The German aerotechnical industry was using heat engines and fossil fuels. They were powered mostly by jet engines.
Yeah, they had some discs with jet engines in them.
Yeah, and I can show you some pictures of those when we get to them here. So there were these two programs working along side by side. I received a letter from a Polish researcher living near Warsaw, Breslau, I think it was at the time, who had a family member that worked in one of the Kugelblitz factories. The Germans called them all collectively called them Kugelblitz, and it means fast ball of light. This man had a relative working in a factory, and when all of the SS factories were evacuated, they had 9 research facilities, all were going by the time the Germans were reversed in Russia and being driven home. At that point, a meeting was held at high level, staff level, where they were looking for strategy, trying to plot strategy. They decided that they would decentralize German industry. The big manufacturers opened subsidiaries in South American countries. And this was to provide an economic base for a Fourth Reich to come back after the Third Reich is forced out. Along with this decentralization of German industry came an attempt to evacuate their most secret and most potential research projects, which included all of the Nazi research programs under the V7 weapons systems. And that was managed by the Nazi Entwicklungsstelle SS E4 staff. And they evacuated the staff and all of the facilities but one. There were 9 research facilities working at one time. And they successfully evacuated 8 of them. One of them was overrun by the Russians. They blew it up and tried to destroy it as much as possible, but the Russians succeeded in capturing the old sites of 4 of these research facilities, where the English captured one and the Americans captured another one, the French another one, but they were gone. There was nothing there. The facilities were evacuated, and the infrastructure was destroyed, blown up by bombs, and then in some cases was even plowed up after that.
Oh, really?
So there was nothing left in Germany when the war ended on any of the disc research projects. The phase that was working through the German aerotechnical industries program was also evacuated, and all of the engineers and scientists were taken with it, leaving nothing behind. And then besides that, as each aerotechnical agency or production facility fell into the hands of the Allied powers overrunning Germany, we backed up trucks, intelligent people backed up trucks and hauled all the documents away from all of those companies. Everything. The files were all taken and brought to the United States. Now, we did that. We brought them to the United States. The English did it. They took what they captured to England. The French took what they captured to France. And the Australians took what they captured to Australia. And how we discovered the German disc research program at all was many years afterwards. The Australians were going through their captured documents, and they found a 16mm briefing film for German staff officers to briefly summarize the disc research program for future events, future planning. And they took this tech film and put a leader on it, a trailer, and described the origin of the Nazi Party and how they became involved with alien extraterrestrials through a metaphysical research program, and how this all came about. And they released that as a video documentary. And it's run around the country.
It was Maria Autisches, wasn't it?
Who?
Maria Autisches was what that medium was.
I don't remember the name of the lady, but yeah, that's where it all started, with a voice channel that they developed into a face-to-face confrontation, meetings, and some assistance given them, and that was all managed by the Nazi Party.
Actually, Hitler actually didn't know a lot about this in the very beginning of it.
It's like our government. This was so secret that they had a very small need-to-know circle. And it was all working within this small need-to-know circle. And people who really didn't need to know weren't included in it. He was advised that a program was in development, but he didn't get any details on it. It's like our government. We know that we have programs in development, but our president doesn't know what we built. He doesn't know what we've got flying in Area 51, for example, and nobody's going to tell him. Because he can be elected. He's an elected official, and in our government, all elected or appointed officials are usually left outside of the loops because they can leave office to take the secrets with them. So there's a staff of career people that never leave the position to manage all of this. And you know, it's interesting because the German society was probably working very much the same way.
I'm sure.
And I got a letter from a Polish researcher, they say, who had a relative working in a Kugelblitz factory, and when they evacuated the factory, they Germans came back a year later and called all of the former workers together that refused to go. You know, had a choice. They could go or stay. Those that stayed behind were called together for a big picnic and an awards program. They're going to pay off bonuses to everybody. They had the picnic and lined them all up for a group shot, and then shot them, machine gun them, and killed them all. All that went to the picnic were killed and buried in a big pit. There were a few that didn't get to the picnic that survived to tell the story, and this guy was one. So he's telling me that, but in his research, he discovered that we had carried away 22 Kugelblitz versions to the United States, and that they were at the White Sands Missile Test Range. Now, how he happened to know that is he had a relative who also was an American serviceman. He was in an American Army, whose name was Robert Allen Kolitsky. And Robert Allen Kolitsky, having had association with the Kugelblitz program in Breslau, was one of the Paperclip people that we brought back here, a scientist that we had working in our own employ. And he was working in the White Sands Missile Test Range where we were testing captured Kugelblitz craft. And now the Polish guy is writing to tell me that his brother, Alan Kolitsky, was the first on the scene at the UFO crash 8 miles southwest of Laredo, which was always regarded as a UFO crash. And he's telling me it wasn't a UFO at all, that it was a German Kugelblitz. That the pilot found in the records, which looked like it was a strange-shaped small human with a football helmet on, was actually a monkey, a rhesus monkey of a larger species.
Oh, really?
That was raised in an American institute. It was trained to be used as a physiological subject aboard the V-2 rockets and the captured Kugelblitz rockets. You know, we knew that we were putting them in V-2s. Our public didn't even know we were testing Kugelblitz here. So we got
kind of like the Russian dog Laika. That was the first one.
Exactly. They're studying physiological effects on the humans because they expected to send them to very high altitudes and at high speeds. So this occupant of this craft that crashed near southwest of Laredo was a monkey named Emu. And Kolitsky's friend trained Emu and 22 other monkeys for future flights. And so Kolitsky is in the control center at White Sands where they have this craft was on a programmed flight. And it broke control someplace along its course and got out of control of the radar people, and they could only watch it, but they couldn't control it anymore. It went into an erratic flight maneuver and descended in a long descent, all watched by radar all the way down to crash southwest of Laredo. Now, the control people knew what happened as soon as it broke control. And they called all air traffic in the clear and told them to look out, stay out of such and such a trajectory because an out-of-control vehicle was coming down there. And they asked for any military aircraft or civilian aircraft operating in the area to watch for it and report. A B-25 flying from California to Texas in that space about that time saw the object descending. They were at something like 10,000 feet. It was 7,000 or 8,000 feet above them. They saw it descending in a wobbling descent, and Major Rudolph Pestalozzi aboard that craft he was an intelligence man freeloading on a flight to Texas. And he picked up the radio and reported over the radio what he observed at it, and it flew out of sight. The B-25 tried to follow it, then returned to course when it outdistanced them. So we had reports on it. We still thought that it was a UFO and that everything fit, except the people at the radar site knew what they were tracking. The people that were observing it knew what they were tracking. The people that trained the monkey knew what they were tracking. They all knew that it was out of control and it was going to crash near Laredo. And so they were even on their way before it actually hit the ground. And it hit the ground about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. By 6 o'clock that afternoon, Robert Allen Kolitsky and his brother Myron arrived in Laredo. They picked up a doctor there, a Army Reserve doctor, and proceeded to the scene where they observed the craft smoking, the ruins smoking, the body in the ruins. They pulled the body out. The doctor from Laredo examined it. They knew it was a rhesus monkey at that time. The people that came later at 11 o'clock that night to pick up the residue. We're only told that it was a crashed test vehicle, and that it should be all the remains should be picked up and carried back to White Sands, and the ground cleared with nothing left behind, which is exactly what they did.
Yeah.
So now one of our UFO reports that we always liked turns out to be a test of a German Kugelblitz, and that was one.
Well, I tell you, the story gets deeper and deeper the more you start researching this, because there's an awful lot of material out there, but very few people are talking about it.
That's right.
I wonder why.
Well, for one thing, our government tries to keep the news and interest from traveling. They try to make it look silly. They try to keep it in the loony bin. There's another UFO case that is commonly regarded as a UFO crash that we know what the vehicle was. It was also a Kugelblitz, one of the German research vehicles. It was a Meet Baruzzo version of a Hano B-2 that was on an experimental flight from Germany that also lost control and crashed on Spitsbergen Island.
That one I know of.
That was recovered by the Norwegians. They sent a team up there and carried it back to Rodby Research Institute, Rodby Technical Institute, which was a research center there. And they studied it for 2 weeks and then announced that they were going to issue a report on it the following Monday. This was on a Friday or something like that. Over the weekend, American and English intelligence people arrived, talked to the authorities there. The Colonel Darnbill, who had made the study and announced that he would report their findings the following week. They can't find him. He has disappeared. The newsmen that were looking for him to get the report couldn't find him. He'd been transferred someplace else. But what really happened is American and English intelligence officers now are afraid that the Norwegians are going to release the information on it. And knowing what it was, they knew it was a German vehicle. And they went to Norway, persuaded the Norwegian government to call it all off, don't release anything, give them certain parts of the residue that they wanted, some that they lacked. And the Norwegian government, the pressure was strong enough, they caved in and agreed to kill the story and pack up material from it and ship it to the United States. I know about that because the officer in the research center there, Rodby Institute, that packed the material to ship, came to my house in Tucson in about 1972 or 73. And he was visiting, he's retired from the service in Norway, and he was visiting California and taking a trip across the country on a tour bus that stopped in Tucson, and to let people look at things here, and it was going to overnight, and he came to my house to tell me that who he was. He was a colonel, a major colonel, oh gosh, can't think of the name now.
He was an officer in the Air Force.
He was an officer in
the Air Force, I think.
In the Norwegian Air Force. And he said that when he packed the material, he made the shipping documents, and he thought that these might be important someday, and he made another set of shipping documents for himself.
Oh, okay.
And he offered to send me a copy of those shipping documents, which never arrived. He didn't give me an address or telephone number or anything. And Nordby, I think his name was. Anyway, I've never received them, but he was an eyewitness to the shipping of the documents to the United States and England. So we know now that the English and the Americans knew a whole lot more about the German research program than they've ever released or published or let anybody know about.
Yeah, that crash on Spitsbergen, I have a story of my own on that one, confirmation from someone that I knew back in Norway. That was there. They was at the site. And of course they were ushered away, and the military took over. All right.
Would you like to see some pictures of the German Kugelblitz program?
I would love to. Maybe
Okay, here is well,
there we go.
No, this is the one we want. This book was published, it's an underground publication, published in Canada. It's written by German refugees Mattern and Friedrich. And they also were associated with the Kugelblitz research program in Germany, and they fled Germany as refugees and got asylum, obtained asylum in Canada. And from the information they had and backtracking through people that they knew and other sources, they succeeded in putting together a story of the Nazi secret weapons that did this program. and they published it in this little book. It was an underground publication printed by Samizdat, which is noted for underground publications.
Right.
It's not a very big book, but it had a lot of information in it about the Google Blitz programs, and it was kind of a start on our research, because we first started out trying to verify the information here and found substantial verification for it, and that they were only making a summary report in this. There's a whole lot more that was going on than actually was in there.
Some of those pictures that you have here now coming up, were they in that book?
No.
Oh.
No. We discovered these in subsequent research. Here's a publication called Flugzeug Profile number 23, printed in Germany just about 5 years ago, where some German researchers are trying to put the programs back together, and they're working with refugee researchers out of Germany, and the report was put together by P. Mercado and an associate, who are Portuguese, and it was they were investigating this story through German researchers that sought asylum in Portugal. See, Portugal was neutral, and at the end of the war, many German researchers went to Portugal.
Yeah.
They all knew that we were looking for them, and they to escape us. Many of them went to Portugal, where P. Mercado and his friend were friends and associates of many of the German exiles living in Portugal, and they were able to collect a lot of information together, even some documents in the same program that we were interested in, and they put these things together. Now, this is a summary of the disc research programs in only one factory, the BMW factory in Germany, who built the engines, the special engines for the Nazi research program, which ran on free energy and gravity control. But these were, in the BMW plant, their research is going along more conventional lines, and they were powered by jet engines. You can see the jet engine hanging underneath there between the wheels, and the relative size of the vehicle, but there's a little man in the middle there in the bottom that gives us reference to scale. Here's another version. This is a two-seater version, and it still has one jet engine on the bottom between the occupants, a little bit larger in size. Now, we're going up in size because there's a little figure up there in the top middle. Here is the next stage of research. There's the size of the man, and the vehicle is getting bigger. This one carried 4 people. The jet engines were internal. Here's another one with a jet engine in the bottom. It has it had a cockpit for 4 people. This is the same, actually it's the same craft that was top and bottom. Now here's a front view of another one. These were called Flugelrad. The first one is Flugelrad V1 and Flugelrad V2, and I think this is probably Flugelrad the top of V3, and this may be the bottom of the Flugelrad V3. And you see how the jet engine was applied to the vanes in the rim. Now, there's 2 jet engines on this one, and it carried more occupants. The little man is to scale, and you can see that the ships are getting larger. They're on the order of 100 feet in diameter, or coming up on 100 feet.
Well, they got pretty big.
Here is a Flugelrad V3 with 2 engines under it. That's a size in the top view. Here's a bottom view of the same one. It has, I think there's 4 seats in this one. This is another Flugelrad, BMW Flugelrad V3, V4. Here's this is a V4. This is a larger one. This had 6 positions aboard. Now you see the relative size of the craft, and we'll get the little man here. There he is, standing alongside the wheel at the bottom there, which we can barely see. There's another one climbing a ladder up there in the front. We're looking at the front half, head on and side, looking at the bow. And here's the rear version of that. You can see the rear, the jet engine efflux there, and the rest of the craft in the profile view. So now here is this is one of the fireballs. This thing just rose into the air and flew through formations, scaring pilots and gathering data, collecting data in its air flight. Here is a side drawing, profile drawing of a Hano 2. You can see it up there in the left-hand corner. I can't read it because it's too indistinct, but this right up here, it says Hano 2. And here we have the performance specifications on it. This is about 100 feet in diameter, a little over 100 feet in diameter, I can't read the specifications from
It
here,
says,
but it was
25 meters.
25 meters. Yeah, that's
75
about
feet.
75 feet. Yeah, okay. And they ranged, the Hanabus ranged from 75 feet to 150 feet, and then there was another big version that ranged from 200 to 300 feet. And they, since it was an experimental program, there was nothing, there was no assembly line. They were all individual
All handmade,
vehicles,
yeah.
all handmade, and especially made in individual vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
Here is a picture of one of those Hanabu 2s out of Breslau. You can see a German Army truck, the cab of a German Army truck right down
On the
here.
left side, yeah.
And it's backed up under the flange. There's a crane here on the other side of the craft. Down here, there are 3 men working under the craft that we can't see in this treatment of the picture, but they're bent over a little bit and standing up, mostly standing up under. They're working on something on the bottom. And right over here in this picture is the German Iron Cross painted on the side of the cabin there. Now notice it has 3 portholes and a vertical side to the cabin right here, and a dome on the top, and another dome on top of that. And notice how that compares with this schematic that we just showed you. Here is the 3 windows. There's the German insignia. 3 more windows, a raised cupola on top, 3 ball hemispheres underneath. And here we have a photograph of one of those in flight. This is another version, a later version. Here's another picture of the same one. This is a schematic of a larger one. Now
That's the Hanabu 3.
This is a Hanabu 3, and you see
That's
the
over
meter,
200 feet, 200 feet across.
200 feet across, 79 meters. Is that what it says?
71 meters.
Anyway, that's a very large one. This one was a version that was designed actually to go to Mars and back. They were very
And it was heavy,
far.
about 14,000 pounds.
Yeah, it was a big one, very heavy. It's much larger than one we saw the German truck backed under. Here's a version of that flying, in flight.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a painting by Jim Nichols, who lives in town here, of one of those in flight from some information we gave him. Here's another one in flight. They're all slightly different because they're all hand-built and separately built. Here's a Hanabu version in flight, another Hanabu version. Here we have a Hanabu 4, I believe that is, that has, here they're doing some experimental work. They've got a German Panzer tank turret mounted on the bottom upside down, because in their development of these special engines, these kind of like rotor motors, they're built by BMW, but they were, when the engines powered by free energy, when they motored up to a certain speed, they created a gravity field around them, and everything floated in the gravity bubble. And they found that the bubble included the whole craft, and that weight didn't seem to be a limitation, and that's why they mounted the Panzer turret on the bottom upside down, seeking to put some armament on these craft. We'll get a better look at the gun here in just a second. There's another one. You can see the gun on the bottom. It's in flight. There you can see the gun quite well, and that's a cast iron Panzer tank turret, inverted, mounted upside down, the bottom of that.
In the later ones, I know also one of the weapons they put on that was they call it something similar to a laser. It was a Pristron tube.
Oh, Klystron tubes. Yeah, they had those. They had beam weapons. They had another device, was the Germans called a Motorstoffel, which means it's a ray. It's a beam that stops engines, interrupts ignition circuits, and caused airplane ignition engines to stop when the beam was turned on. Here is another picture with the cannon turret on the bottom. Here you can see it quite clearly.
Yeah. I wonder if that was the Pristron tube.
No, that's not a Pristron tube. No, that's just a Panzer turret. Here you can see the German Iron Cross insignia on the bottom of that one we just saw. And here is the Panzer turret upside down, mounted on the bottom of the disc. The big disc.
Oh.
Well, I guess that finished.
When they had it upside down, when they were going to park it, how did they get it right side up again?
No, they have legs that extend down beyond the turret, and it stands on its legs, and the turret doesn't touch the ground.
Oh, okay.
So that's all the pictures I brought along on that there. If you want to move on to another subject, we got some
But I also know that I've seen also some drawings. Hitler was thinking quite far into the future. In fact, there were some drawings that were captured that showed a space station.
That's right.
That was kind of like, it looked like a tube, but they had 4 tubes inside there, but there was room for 4 flying discs in that space station. Now, have you heard if they ever started building that? But I know the drawings were.
Well, I don't know how far they got with building their space station. They also had advanced drawings on a cylindrical craft that would carry 3 Hanabu's and about 6 Vril craft. The Vril craft were a series of discs that were smaller than the Hanabu's, and I brought some pictures here. I don't know whether we can get them on the camera or not, but do you think there's a way we can show
yeah,
these?
we could do that on
over shoulder something.
Yeah, that would be a good one.
Here is the schematic we looked at.
Yeah.
And here is the Adamsky. Where's the camera? Here's the
Tell you
Adamsky.
what, why don't we give that to Christine, and we can take it in there and show it on the camera in the
When she
studio.
brings them up on the screen over there, we'll say what they are. If they keep them in order here, it'll be better.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Try to keep them in order.
Yeah, he can show those on the Elmo in there.
So the letter from the Polish guy was in his research where he described our carrying away 22 Kugelblitz that he knew about, his associates knew about. He told me in the letter, he said that in, I think it was the Schweinfurt raid, after we started carpet bombing Germany, when we would send a ribbon of bombers over Germany, 800 bombers on that night, 800 bombers in a long ribbon of craft to bomb, I think it was the Schweinfurt plant. And if you can imagine 800 bombers in flight, it's a formation that takes hours to pass.
Yeah.
And the Germans attacked that wave of bombers and shot down 200 bombers in one-fourth of our fleet, and 200 bombers and crews brought down that one night, with the only night that they, according to my Polish communicator, that was the only night they used the Hanabu craft.
Yeah, there we go.
There we go. Okay, this is the schematic again. And if you give me the next picture, please. Notice the hemispheres underneath. And you'll see in the next picture, there we go. Here's a picture taken by George Adamsky in California in 1952. And this looks almost identical to the Hanabu craft. And those first Hanabu craft were flown in 1943 and 44 in Germany. The same style. Next, please.
You got the 3 windows on the side, and you got the 3 pods underneath.
Yeah. Here is now these are Vril craft. This is a Vril, I think it's a Vril 2. The Vril craft were smaller versions. They only carried 1 or 2 crew members. Next picture, please. This is a Vril, I think it's a Vril 7, if I remember correctly. And now if you'll look at the profile, the dome on the top, the in-sloping curve, concave curve on the top flange, and convex curve on the bottom. Now, the next picture, please. Here you see 3 of those flying over a field in Italy, a school ground in Italy. Okay, next, please. The next one is a Vril 7. No, it's another type altogether, and I don't have any pictures of it, but it was in my picture file here, so we'll take a look at that. Now, next, please. Here is a photograph of an early Vril type under experimental test. And there were several versions, again, because they were building each one separately and improving on the ones before that. So you'll see probably a couple of pictures of each of the first 3. There, next picture, please. Here's the same craft in flight. You notice the 3 hemispherical protrusions on the bottom. Actually, they're not covered with the hemispherical domes there, but they do have the cupola profile on that particular version. There's one more, I believe, in there. Let's see the next one. Yeah, this is the same craft again under test. Came from the Australian German tech film that they discovered years after the war was over. Next, please. Here's another picture of the same one under test. Next, please, or one very similar.
There you see the gun again underneath.
They're experimenting there with a smaller gun on the smaller craft. Next, please. There's another picture of the same version. And it was the next.
Now this is the krill also.
These are all Vril versions. There's one.
Now there you see the light around it.
Yeah, that one has the ionic field around it. It's changing direction rapidly or something, and and emanating a glow, an ionized field of some kind. Next, please. Here's another version of the Vril craft in flight. You only can see a bottom view of that. Next, please. There's another picture of that one up close where it passed direct overhead, and you can see that some kind of a ray projector, probably an antenna for a ray cannon, shows on the rim there. Next, please. There's another larger version in flight. This is probably a Hano version with a different profile on the top. Next, please. This is the same craft again, closer up. Next, please. That's it. There's lots of those pictures in that in the film. I just brought a few down here because the film runs almost. The pictures alone takes a half an hour.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to see them sometime. There were also some records found that claims that there were some 260 known flying discs that were built by the Germans.
I've seen some references to something like that, and most of them were different too because they still weren't building them on an assembly line.
Right. Yeah,
but they were improving the characteristics. They tried all kinds of different weapon systems. They're at the same time that they were developing the Kugelblitz, they were developing the Strahl cannon. It's a beam weapon. They were developing the Motorstoppel. It's another beam weapon. They were developing a rocket system, probably air type missiles, but they were very fast. They used a different. Didn't use just rockets for propulsion. They had another propulsion system that made them faster, and a number of things that were in the works, but they didn't have them under mass production yet. Had they been able to do so, we might not have seen a different end to the war.
They were really close. They were
very close. They also were very close with the atomic bomb.
They were.
They were developed their heavy water in Norway. It's where we got the idea for the heavy water to make our first atomic bomb.
Yeah, there were some movies out on that one. That was quite interesting.
Movie,
Kirk Douglas did one. Do you remember that?
That's a good one.
Yeah.
And quite accurate.
And yeah, there was. That was quite real.